Okay, we're going to start work on our second InDesign flyer, but before we jump back into InDesign, let's go back into Blackboard and take a look at our assignment examples so that we can refresh our memory about what we're trying to achieve. So we've already completed the open mic night flyer, and the second example is for green gardeners. So you can see that this flyer is going to have a different dimension. It's a narrower flyer than the first one that we worked on. And it also has these little marks on all four corners. Those are called crop marks, and those are indications for or guides for a printer that this document would need to be trimmed right at that point. So assuming that we were going to trim our document using these lines as guides, and that's where our blade is going to go, a little bit of our image and our background is going to go beyond that trim and is going to get cut off. That is called a bleed, and that is a standard way that bleeds are set up. They're set up to go beyond the edge of the final trimmed piece. So the final trimmed dimensions of the piece that you're working on are not this part that encompasses the printer marks, but it's the part within the printer marks. If you were to take a ruler and to draw a line from one end to the other, anything outside of that is outside the print area. It's outside the dimensions, the specified dimensions of our document. It's just it's excess, but we need that so that if there happens to be a shift on press, so as the paper is going through the press and it's being trimmed afterward, if there happens to be a shift, we don't want to where the background or an image is supposed to bleed off of the edge of our document. We don't want any kind of little sliver of white or something like that showing. So it's very important that we keep this in mind. We need to set up a bleed, and when we output our document as a PDF, we're going to make sure that these trim marks are turned on. So now that we've taken a look to see what we have required for the document setup and output, we're going to go ahead and get back into InDesign. So we can close out of our earlier flyer that we worked on. Okay, so we're ready to create a new document in InDesign. I would go ahead and click on New, and when we okay, so we're ready to create a new document in InDesign. So I'm going to go ahead and create New. Again, we're ready to create a new document in InDesign. So I'm going to click New. When I click New, I have my New Document dialog box that appears. Now, for the last flyer, we changed our units and increments in the preferences to inches. But for this flyer, the specifications that we've received are in millimeters again. So we need to go ahead and change our units and increments back to millimeters. So we would go to InDesign, Preferences, and then choose Units and Increments. But they're grayed out right now. We're not able to select this, and the reason for that is because we can't change any of our settings when we're in the New Document dialog box. So let's cancel this, go back to our preferences, change the ruler units from inches back to millimeters, and then go back to New. And we need to make some custom settings here. Now we're going to leave the print intent alone. We have some other options here, such as web and mobile, but let's leave it at print. Page size is going to be not letter like we used last time, but a custom measurement. So for width, we're going to type in 115, hit tab to go to the next box. And for height, we'll type in 275, hit tab. For margins, we're going to type in 15. So you should have this little link icon selected, so it should look like a darker box. If we click on that to deselect it, we see a broken link, and that's not what we want. So make sure it doesn't look like a broken link. Click on it to make sure that it's a whole link, and then type 15 in the first box. Hit tab, and then because this is linked so that all the settings are the same, it automatically puts our 15 into all of our margins. Now we need to expand our bleed and slug area. We're going to leave slug alone, but for our bleed, we're going to type in 3, so we're going to have a 3 millimeter bleed. That's equivalent to 1/8 of an inch, which is the standard for North America. For a bleed is 1/8 of an inch. Now we're using millimeters, which indicates that this our fictional client that we're making the flyer for is based out of Europe, maybe like England. So bleed 3 millimeters. Make sure that you have your link selected. It's not broken. Type in 3 and then hit tab, and all of our bleed areas are going to be 3 millimeters. Now we can hit OK, and we have our document set up correctly. So we have some invisible guidelines, or they're visible to us, the designer, as we're working on the document, but they're going to be invisible when in the final project, but they're going to be invisible in the final output. So we should have this inner set of guidelines, which is indicating our margin, and then we're going to have an outer set of guidelines that goes beyond the edge of our document, which indicates the extent of the bleed. So that's our 3 millimeters, or our 1/8 inch if we were working on a if our client was in North America. Okay, so we should just make sure that our work environment is at essentials. If you're just picking this up from Flyer 1, then you can probably leave this alone. We want our swatches panel to be visible. Otherwise, you could always choose Reset Essentials. But you do want to have your swatches flyer visible. Okay, next thing we're going to do is make some colors for our flyer. So by default, we already have some colors in here. Since this is a document intended for print, our color build is going to be cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, a 4-color process, and it's CMYK is another word for it. And so what we see in here is we see the cyan, magenta, yellow, and black already set up. K represents black. So cyan is, C is cyan. This is our cyan color. It's at 100%, and the other colors are at 0. Magenta is at 100% magenta. The other color is 0, and so on. We also have some the RGB colors in here, red, green, and blue. And you can see that these RGB colors are a color build, or for example, the red is made of 15% cyan and 100% magenta and 100% yellow, 0% black. Green is 75% cyan, etc. So this icon represents or indicates that our swatch is a CMYK color. So let's choose New Swatch, or click on the New Swatch button. So we have some custom colors that have been specified by our client, and we want to make a swatch based on those colors. So in order to do that, we'll go ahead and double click on this swatch, and then we'll start entering our colors. So we need, we're going to make a green. We're going to type 55 for cyan, 0 magenta, 100 yellow, and 0 black. Make sure that color type is processed. There's other types of colors here that we'll get to in a few minutes, but we want this color to be processed. Color mode should be CMYK. Hit OK, and our color swatch changes to our customized green. Let's rename this color swatch GG Green. So GG for Green Gardeners. Let's make a new color swatch. Double click, enter our new percentages. Hit OK. Oops, and let's rename our swatch GG Orange. Let's make a third color. We'll name this one GG Dark Green and type in our percentages. So we have 3 new CMYK color swatches that we've created for our flyer, and we've named them something that descriptive so that we can keep track of what they are. We need to create a 4th color. This color is going to be set up differently than the other 3. The color type is going to be spot, and the color mode is going to be Pantone. We could choose Pantone plus solid coated, and we're going to choose the Pantone color. Pantones are pre-mixed inks. We're going to choose Pantone Orange 021C. Hit OK. And that appears in our swatches panel. All right, so the next thing we need to do now that we have our colors set up is to create a background fill for our document. So we're going to go to our rectangle frame tool. We're going to make sure that we start dragging our rectangle frame from our bleed edge, not our document edge, which is the white, but this guideline, which is our bleed, because we want our background to bleed. And we can fill this with our GG green. In our swatches panel, and make sure that your rectangle frame is still selected, go to the tint slider, and you can use the slider to change the percentage of our color fill to 25. So we're going to make this pretty light. Okay, and then you can deselect by clicking outside of the box. It helps to get out of your rectangle frame tool, go back to your selection tool. We want to place an image of a flower in our background. Make sure that you're on the selection tool and that you've selected the background frame. Go to File, Place, navigate to the Flyer 2 folder inside of your assignment folder, choose sunflowermod.png. Now the image of the flower is placed inside of our rectangle frame. If I click this central target area, I can move the flower within the frame. We'd like to do some work on this flower. If we were to go and take a look at our example, we want to make sure that it's facing to the right, it's cropped, or it bleeds on the left and top, and it should be sized in such a way that it kind of fills in this upper area of our document. So I'm going to refer to this as I position and size this flower. So I'm going to go to the Direct Select tool, which is this white arrow, and that allows me to directly select my flower image and move it around without moving this fill area, this rectangle frame. I want to mirror this image or flip it horizontal so that it's facing the other way. So I want to flip this image horizontally so that it's facing the other way. Sometimes that's called mirroring the image. There's an icon called Flip Horizontal that I can select, and when I do that, it flips my image horizontal. It puts it off over into the pasteboard, but I can go ahead and just click and drag that back onto my document. And I'm just going to move this into position. I'm going to hold the Shift key as I drag the text frame to make this flower image a bit larger so that it's positioned more like the example, and it takes up a good portion of the upper part of the layout. Okay, so that looks about right. Next thing I want to do is to create a text box and enter some text. So I'm going to choose the Type tool, click and drag to make a text box, type in "have a blooming good summer." So we need to choose a different font. The font that's been specified by our imaginary client is called Gill Sans. So let's select Gill Sans from our type menu. If we were still in Typekit and we have some fonts installed in Typekit, it's going to filter out all other fonts in our list. So what we need to do is deselect, and then we can scroll down and find Gill Sans. Let's resize the text. We have some options for Gill Sans. By default, we're on regular, but we want Gill Sans Light for this. And what I'm doing right now is I'm looking at the example, and I am going to try to match up the example text with mine. Okay, so now I have my text looking pretty close to the text in the example that I've been given. There's a few refinements I need to make. I might see if I need to make this smaller text bold and maybe just a bit smaller. I don't know. It's a little bit of experimenting here to see what's the right thing. Maybe it was fine the way it was. Okay, so we're going to adjust the leading on our headline. It's a little bit too wide. Leading is defined as the space between lines of text. And we've got 3 lines of text here. But since the text is larger and the lines are very short, it's not body text. It's not a lot of text that we need to read. We can tighten this leading up. And if we select this text and take a look at our leading right now, it's at 43.2 points, which is a default that InDesign has given us since we've chosen 36 points as the size of our text. We know that it's the default because there are parentheses around this number, and that indicates a default. So very rarely is a professional designer ever going to want to leave leading the number here at the default. You're letting the software make a decision for you, which is really something that you should be deciding. So we need to choose a smaller number. So let's try something like 36, and we could go a little bit smaller than that. Let's try 30. Now that looks pretty good between the well, let's go back to that's a little tight. Let's try 32. Okay, let's go back to 36. Sometimes it takes a little bit of adjusting. Now that looks pretty good, and I'm looking at the example, and I think that matches. Problem is, I see an uneven amount of leading between the second and the last line. It's not the same as between the first and the second line. So the way we can solve that is we can make a copy of our text box. I hit Command C, Command V to paste. And let's double click and highlight our smaller text in black and delete that. And hit delete again. And when we do that, it bumps up our last line of text in our headline, and things look right. So now I'm going to, in the copy text box, going to go ahead and select the headline text from there and hit delete, and then drag our black text back into position underneath. If we need to make some adjustments to the location of our text box, we can use the arrow keys on our keyboard. So if I use the down arrow, it's nudging this block of text down a little bit. And right now that looks about right if I compare this with our example. Now we need to place a logo into our document. So go to File, Place, make sure you're still inside your Flyer 2 Resources folder, choose the logo, place that into your document. Now again, it comes in a little bit large, so let's hold the Shift key and Command key and drag to resize. Again, Shift, Command, drag to resize until it's the size that you want it to be. Now the logo also bleeds, and actually what I want to do is size this again. I'm looking at my example. I'm going to nudge it around with my arrow keys, and I'm going to align this logo with my margin guidelines. So the way I have this aligned is that the left-hand edge of the white box on the logo aligns with the left-hand margin, and the baseline of the word gardeners aligns with the bottom margin guideline. Let's shorten our image so that it doesn't go past the bleed. All right, so we need to add another element, which is a little starburst. We're going to have a new store open now message inside there. So let's click on our rectangle frame tool and choose the polygon frame tool. And let's click in the general area where we're going to place our starburst. If we just hit OK, we get a six-sided polygon that doesn't really look exactly what we're going for. So let's delete that and try again. So let's click in the general area that we'd like to place our starburst. Let's make the number of sides 48, and let's make the start inset 10. Hit OK, and now we have a something that looks more like what we're going for. So go back to the Move tool and move this into position. You could resize this a bit, but it doesn't need too much resizing. And we want to make this our GG orange color. So we need to put some text inside of here. It's going to say New Store Open Now. We're going to go to the Type tool, click and drag to add some text, type in New Store, hit Return, type in Open Now, Command A to select all, type in Gill Sans in your font menu, and you'll see that Gill Sans comes up. Choose, let's try Gill Sans Regular, and let's resize this. So 18 point, that's a little big. How about 14 point? That looks about right. Let's align center. And we need to change the font color to paper, which is white. And then we could zoom in a bit so we can see what we're doing. Okay, we want this to look centered inside of our starburst. And again, you can, if you want to refine your positioning, you can use the arrow keys on your keyboard. And let's change the angle of this a bit. So if I am in my selection tool and I hover over the corner node of any of the corner nodes of this text box and I click and drag, it's going to allow me to change the angle. So I think 20% looks about right. Okay, so we can zoom out, take a look at our layout, check to make sure it looks okay. If you want to get rid of these guidelines, you can go to View and choose Hide Frame Edges. You can also, if you want to see what your document will look like without these margin guides and bleed guides on, you can go to View, Screen Mode, and Presentation, and you can get a good sense of what this is going to look like. Now this is what the finished document would look like if it were cropped. You're not seeing the area of the design that has a bleed. Hit escape. We're going to go to File, Save As. Inside of your Flyer 02 folder, you do not want to save it inside of your Resources folder. Save it outside of the Resources folder. Name it your last name _ ID Flyer 02. And hit save. So for this flyer, we don't want to forget to save our PDF document and include the printer's marks and the bleed. So we're going to go to File, Export. Make sure that the format is Adobe PDF Print. Choose Save. Go to Marks and Bleeds. Choose Crop Marks. Make sure that Crop Marks is the only box that's checked under Marks, and then go to under Bleed and Slug. Make sure to check the box for Use Document Bleed Settings. So you should see that 3 millimeters, and then choose Export. Make sure that your PDF document is in the same folder as your original InDesign document. Double click to open. You want to make sure that you check to see if the crop marks and the bleed are visible. So the bleed needs to go beyond the crop marks. Let's zoom out a bit and get a look at our entire document, and that looks good. So that is the end of Flyer 2.